Mm. Okay. Welcome everybody. As a reminder, like Tony and all of you, actually, Brian, because you're actually over there, and I'm only seeing you partially. I'm not paying attention if like you're raising your hand or anything on the chat. So just butt in, shout out, speak up. You know, when you find a moment and you have something you want to say, just go ahead and say it. Because I mean, that it's definitely welcomed. You know, whatever you have to say is, you know, all of your questions and comments are really, really good. So go ahead and just butt in, you know.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
So let's start with the prayers. The taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Actually, this whole set of prayers that goes all the way through the mandala offering and the dedication prayers and all that kind of stuff. This is part of, if you want a more in-depth, basically these prayers are kind of an outline of a much more in-depth practice. And so it, which is called, I called it Preparing the Mind for Meditation. If you go to tbcwp.org and you go to the 3 horizontal bars up at the left-hand corner and you click on resources, when you get to resources, click on downloads, and then this will come up, and you'll see under the Lam Rim, it's Lam Rim preliminary topic number 2, called Preparing the Mind for Meditation. And it takes you in depth through all of these prayers and the kind of the visualizations that go with them and what's behind them, the experience behind them. And if you're interested in continuing on the Bodhisattva path and actually getting into a later on at some point, maybe getting into a tantric practice, if you have had, or if you've had an empowerment, a tantric empowerment, but a sort of don't know what to do with it. It's sort of sitting there because you haven't figured out what to do with it. This thing, preparing the mind for meditation, is directly related to the tantric practice. It's a foundation actually for it. Once you get into tantric practice, you will realize, oh, this thing I've been doing all along is part of the whole tantric sadhana. It's really important to familiarize yourself with this, preparing the mind for meditation, if you want to keep going on this path. The other thing I would say, well, no, I'll stop there. All right, so this first taking refuge in generating bodhicitta, we're talking about that we're taking refuge in our gurus, our spiritual teachers, who are sort of like the emissaries for us in this world for the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. And we're taking refuge in the enlightened beings themselves. We're taking refuge in the Dharma realizations that we ourselves have as we go along this path. And we're taking refuge in this assembly of bodhisattvas. Some of them are right physically on the planet, and some of them are in other realms, but we can access them. And they are aware of us if we are, you know, calling to them. So we're taking refuge in those things, the gurus, the enlightened beings, the Dharma realizations, and the assembly of bodhisattvas. And when it says here, through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas is a big topic. Those are what are called the perfections. And the perfections are like, if we're on one shore of the sea of samsara, you might use this as a visual, and enlightenment is on the other shore, the opposite of the sea. Well, the paramitas act kind of as a bridge that will carry us, that will bring us across the whole, through and out of samsara into enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So these paramitas, the Shantideva's entire way of the Bodhisattva is set up. All of his chapters are set up based on these paramitas. And many of you are familiar with them: generosity, ethical discipline, patience, enthusiastic effort, meditative concentration, and wisdom realizing emptiness. But as you go further into, once you've had a realization of emptiness, then those paramitas break off into 4 more, which we'll talk about later in this class. But it's this is all what's being talked about in this opening prayer of taking refuge. So there's a lot there when you really get into it and study it and analyze it. And the more you can do that, I'll say from my own experience, the more you can really have a feeling for what this prayer is saying, the more powerful it is, the more moving it is, the more meaningful it is. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. So let's go ahead and do this in the Tibetan 3 times. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dagni syapkyu chi dagi jinso gipe sonam ki rola penchir sangye druparso Sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi Dagi jinso gipe sonam ki Rola penchir sangye druparso Sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi Dagi jinso gipe sonam ki Drola penchir sangye druparso. Then with these 4 immeasurable thoughts, imagine that you are surrounded by all sentient beings that exist, in their entirety, in their infinitude, in all the various forms that sentient beings can take. Just imagine them around you and think these 4 immeasurable thoughts with the Bodhisattva intention of becoming enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Well, welcome, Bino. Bino the dog is here. Hello, Bino. Hello, welcome. Okay, now we go to this the 7-limb prayer. And again, this is in the if you just want to look in detail on this particular practice, because this particular practice is for accumulating merit and purifying one's negative karma. So if you want to accumulate what we've been calling sonam, this positive potential that will help us on this bodhisattva path, and you want to purify your negative karma, this is the practice that is given. And it's in, you may not remember this, but this is actually in Shantideva's 2nd chapter. We talked about this. So again, if you want a more thorough view into this particular practice, you go to tbcwp.org, you go to the 3 horizontal bars at the top, click it, go to resources, and then under resources, go to downloads, and then scroll down until you find the 7-limb practice. And that will take you through this practice in depth so that you understand what each of these lines are referring to, along with the kind of visualizations that you would use in this practice, okay? But just for today's prayer, just imagine that the Buddha is in the space in front of you. Surrounding the Buddha are all of the assembly of bodhisattvas and all the other Buddhas that exist. So we're basically visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha in front of us. And if you have a guru, if you have a spiritual teacher who you have identified as your guru and they've identified you as their disciple, then you imagine that Shakyamuni Buddha is basically your guru taking that form. So Shakyamuni Buddha is in the space in front of you. All the bodhisattvas and all the other Buddhas are there in the sky surrounding Shakyamuni Buddha. Then underneath Shakyamuni Buddha are all our spiritual teachers. All our, not only Buddhist spiritual teachers, but any teacher that we've had that we think has benefited us on our spiritual path. It's important to put them there. It's important for us to recognize how we have been helped along the way, and to see that interconnected relationship. So then you visualize yourself, and for most of us, visualize yourself as if you are now like a baby bodhisattva. You're at the very beginning stages of being a bodhisattva, and you're sitting there or standing there, however you wish to see it at this point, in front of this visualization of all the Buddha's bodhisattvas and spiritual teachers. So you picture yourself as the bodhisattva who's just starting out on the path, and then you surround yourself on either side and behind you with every, just imagine every sentient being, every lifetime you've ever taken since beginningless time. So we're talking about an infinite number of beings that you have been. And imagine that it's all there present with you now, because literally those past lives, the imprints and the propensities from those past lives are actually right now with us in our mental continuum. And that's where it is. It's nowhere else. So if we're going to be purifying our karma, and if we're going to be accumulating merit, we're purifying our own mental continuum, which contains all these imprints. So by visualizing all these past lives that you've had, you're sort of visualizing, you're kind of having a symbol of what your mental continuum is. And it's right there for all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to see, right? And so you're going through this practice with that in mind, okay? So now we'll recite this. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And then finally, we'll do this mandala offering, where we are imagining an entire, all of existence, imagining all of existence, where every being has completely removed all their afflictive emotions, all the negative karma that arises from them, and completely uprooted the ignorance, which is the basis of that. So that all beings have now understood the nature of reality, removed all afflictive obscurations and the negative karma, and imagine what existence would be like if that were the case. What an interdependent existence would be like in that situation. This is what, as bodhisattvas, we're working towards. So we make this mandala offering, just a beautiful mandala in space, made of light. And as we say this prayer, we put these thoughts into that mandala. And at the end of the prayer, where we say Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnirya Tayami, we send that mandala into the heart, or the hearts of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, our spiritual teachers, and all of the teachers who have benefited us along our way. Sajipaki Jukshime Tok Drangri Rablingji Nidegen Sangye Jingdu Mi Deulwagi Drokunam Dakshinga Chepasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyataya. Okay. And then we have the prayers that Geshe asked us to recite the Dharma Hetu first. And the Dharma Hetu, I was reading a little bit more about this. It's one of the most ancient of the Sanskrit Buddhist prayers, and it is found on many archaeological sites throughout India. Many of the old temples, inscriptions. And they found this prayer quite a bit. So it's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of power in it through just those who have been reciting this over the centuries. So we are joining that. We're joining that as we recite this. So I just want to explain what it's saying. The first line is talking about all phenomena which arise from a cause, and all phenomena arise from a cause. The second line says the Buddha has declared what their causes are. So we're talking about both what we would think of being as negative or destructive phenomena and positive or constructive phenomena. The Buddha has told us what causes suffering, what causes the negative phenomena to occur, and also what causes positive phenomena to occur. So, and then he also, the Buddha, the third line says, he's told us what is the cessation of those causes. How do we actually achieve the cessation of this cyclic existence, this suffering of samsara, and reach what they call cessation, which is nirvana. Nirvana just simply means cessation of suffering, basically is what it means. Then the fourth line says, this was what the great Buddha had taught, and may a blessing rest on it. So here we go. Om ye dharma hetu prabhava, hetu tesham tathagato hyavada, tesham shayo niroda, evam vahimaha shramanana swoha. And then stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, Nagarjuna being the foremost historical, except for the Buddha, expert on emptiness. He really explained it for everybody. So here's stanza 5. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. Here again, we've talked about this. Actions is a translation of the term karma. So by extinguishing karma, the actions, the karma that as a result of our afflictive emotions, we will achieve liberation from suffering, the suffering of cyclic existence. So destructive actions and the afflictions, they arise from a misconception, a misunderstanding of the way things exist. And these misconceptions arise from elaborations. We conceptually elaborate about all kinds of things. We know we do this. And then if we have the fourth line is saying, is if we can actually develop an understanding and then a realization of what emptiness is talking about, then these elaborations will cease. We will know the truth of what actually is, and we will no longer conceptually elaborate about things. So this is again something Geshe Drakpa asked us. I mean, Geshe Nima asked us to recite anytime we're going to be talking about emptiness. So we're still on in Shantideva's wisdom chapter. We're on the part that I'm calling emptiness in the middle way. This is what is being discussed here, emptiness in the middle way. And we're getting to a point now where we've talked about what happens when Bodhisattva transforms into a Buddha. And I quickly want to go through these paths again because they're really important that we understand them. So there are 5 paths that they talk about of a bodhisattva. The first is called the path of accumulation. What we're accumulating there is merit, sonam, positive potential. We're also accumulating wisdom as we go along, but the big thing is positive potential, merit, sonam. So we don't enter this path until we actually have a spontaneous feeling, no matter what sentient being we see. We just say, either when will I become enlightened for their benefit, or I will become enlightened for this being's benefit. I'm going to become enlightened for this being's benefit. So that whoever we look at.
So how do you get to that?
You practice it.
What are the practices?
Well, I'll go back to what we just talked about. For developing merit, you do the 7 limb practice. That 7 limb practice that we just went through in the prayers. This is why I pointed out where you're going to find it on our website, where you can go into detail with this, because those are designed for accumulating merit and purifying negative karma. And that's what you're doing in the path of accumulation. You're accumulating merit. You're purifying.
That's not the only way you can accumulate merit.
It's not the only way you can, but that's one way.
I mean, most of your day is going to be spent doing other things.
Well, if you're seeing any sentient beings throughout the day, that's one way you would do it.
I just.
But if all, in any, oh, go ahead, because yes, of course, you're right. Go ahead. If you want to talk about the other ways.
Want to point out that if you,
Yeah, I mean, basically,
morality in general.
all right, I will say, if you're going to, well, Kavita's question, if you want to be developing merit.
If you're gonna go over these 5.
If you're going,
paths.
right, the 5 paths also embodied within these 5 paths are what we talked about at the beginning also, these paramitas, these perfections. There are so-called 6 of them. When you actually get up to the point of enlightenment, there are 10 of them. But the first 4, generosity, ethical discipline, patience, and enthusiastic effort, all of these are accumulating your merit. All of these are part of the accumulation of merit aspect of the path.
Would you repeat those 5?
Generosity. All right, and generosity is not simply a material generosity, it's generosity of your heart, generosity of your mind, generosity with all beings, basically. And I'm talking about beings who you can't stand, who you think are terrible beings. You have to have a sort of a generosity in your mind about understanding why they have become this way, that they are acting out based on their ignorance and their afflictive emotions, and it's causing them and others great suffering. So we may all hate a particular politician or something, but if we're on the Bodhisattva path, we have to have a huge generosity in our mind towards these people to understand what is driving them, and that make the wish and intention that we are going to go all the way to Buddhahood so that we can help every other being like this. There are all sorts of very disturbed beings out there. We all know this. But we don't want to be condemning them. We don't want to be saying, to hell with you, or I wish you were annihilated or extinct. That is not how we're going to accumulate any kind of sonam or merit. So that's when we're talking about generosity, we're talking about that. Patience is the same way. You're patient. You have a sort of a patience with the actual being, but you don't have to have a patience with their actions, but the being themselves. You have to have patience with them. Understand that they're acting out based in negative ways, based on their misunderstanding of how things exist. And because of that, they have all these afflictive emotions, and then the way they behave negatively. This is what a bodhisattva has to be constantly thinking of. Then ethical discipline. We ourselves as bodhisattvas have to really practice our ethical discipline. And there's body, speech, and mind. They're all listed in the links that I gave you earlier. And this we have to study for ourselves. We really have to study further. I mean, we should go through this in some class, but not right now. It's too in depth. But ethical discipline is very important. And then we have to have this courageous, enthusiastic effort as we are dealing with all of the people, all of the sentient beings in our lives. This effort to keep going, to never give up, because we are on a long trajectory here, and that will keep us sort of buoyant. It'll keep us able to continue on this path and not give up, not fall into sort of like some kind of depression at the state of the way everything is and just saying, I give up, it doesn't matter. This is not where a bodhisattva is going. That's not what the path is about. So these first 4 things, generosity, ethical discipline, patience, and enthusiastic effort, are all very important in the path of accumulation. Then we go, when you've accumulated enough sonam, merit, positive potential. That's when you enter the second path, which is called the path of preparation. And what you're preparing for here is a direct realization of emptiness. That's what you're preparing for. So in the path of preparation, we become more and more familiar in our meditation with the non-dual aspect of subject and object. We've talked about this before. I'm just going over this quickly. That's what you're getting very, very familiar with, and deeper and deeper into this realization or understanding that subject and object are not 2 separate dual things. They are interdependent. Then when we've had we've gone through, our meditation on this non-dual thing has gotten to the point where we actually have a non-dual realization of emptiness itself. Then we're on the next path, which is called the path of seeing. That's the third path. That's when we've had an experience of emptiness. So we sort of develop that experience of emptiness over and over and over again. And that brings us into what's called the path of meditation. And in the path of meditation, what we are doing is we're cleansing our mind cleansing our consciousness through this understanding and realization of emptiness that we've had. And the way we are cleansing our consciousness is we're removing what they call all of our afflictive obscurations. These are our afflictive emotions that are based on our ignorance, that cause all our negative karma. So we're removing these afflictive obscurations. The afflictive obscurations are what are the basis of samsara. So we're removing the obscurations to liberation from samsara. That's one of the things we're working on in the path of meditation. The other thing we're working on in the path of meditation is we're removing what they call the cognitive obscurations. These are all the obscurations to omniscience. And what they're talking about with the cognitive obscurations has to do, again, with what they call the three spheres. You have subject, you have object, and you have the interaction between subject and object. And in the path of meditation, you're bringing this closer and closer and closer together until you actually realize that subject, object, and the action that takes place between them is completely non-dual. And when you've realized that, then you become enlightened. You have this diamond-like concentration which occurs, and you achieve omniscience. And omniscience is the state of enlightenment. The way this works with the paramitas is that the path of accumulation, I said, was generosity, ethical discipline, patience, enthusiastic effort. Then when you go to the path of preparation, you continue with those. Once you've hit the path of seeing, which is when you have a direct realization of emptiness, well, the path of preparation, you're doing this meditative concentration. Then you go to the, when you have the path of seeing, realization of emptiness, that's in the 5 paramitas or the 6 paramitas, that's called wisdom. And they're referring to wisdom realizing emptiness. But there's more, because when you continue into the path of what they call the path of meditation, then you're going through these, and these are really important, and it goes into what we're going to talk about with the non-conceptual Buddha. So you go into the next path, it breaks down into some more paramitas. So the next one is called skillful means. So in this path of meditation, you're developing these skillful means of removing these afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations to liberate. So you'll be liberated from samsara, and you'll be able to be omniscient, to become enlightened. And then you're also then you are developing these, what they call prayerful aspirations. So that as a bodhisattva who's on the cusp of becoming a Buddha, you are firming up in your mind, in your consciousness, that you are doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings. You are making this like a vow. These prayerful aspirations that you're becoming enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings becomes like a vow on your mind stream, so that it will not go away if you lose the ability to have conceptual thought. It will still be part of your mind stream. So that's called prayerful aspirations. The next paramita is the 9th one is called spiritual power, where you are developing the power of a great spiritual being, the power to be able to truly be of benefit and help others, the spiritual power. And then the final one, when you actually achieve omniscience and become enlightened, is called untainted, exalted wisdom. It means that it's a wisdom that's completely untainted by anything. And so you're getting to this wisdom of the Buddha, of almost like the primordial Buddha. I want to read again to you what His Holiness said is the description of what it is when you become enlightened, and then we'll get into the objections that the other schools have about this. When omniscience occurs, the Bodhisattva reaches the fifth and final path called the path of no more learning and achieves the enlightened state of a Buddha. Once omniscient wisdom arises, all conceptual elaboration and activity vanishes and it never recurs. The mind has no other object to fix on, no ideas like it is empty or it is not empty. All conceptual thought and activity is brought to complete stillness. This is a state of equality, unceasing and unborn, which is the very character of space. There is no name for it. It is beyond thought and explanation. It is the unmanifested, inconceivable aspect of a Buddha known as the Dharmakaya. Of course, they give it a name because we have to use our concepts, which it means truth body, but they're actually what they're talking about is an awareness, a complete awareness of the nature of reality. So the Dharmakaya is the sphere of wisdom awareness, the fundamental ground of consciousness from which Buddhas arise and manifest for the benefit of others, and to which they return after their manifestation dissolves. So I'm sure, for all of us, that's kind of heady stuff, and it's hard to even think what that means. The schools, the other Buddhist schools that are, I'm calling them realist schools. And the reason I'm calling them realist is that these other schools, they have some aspect in them where they say things do actually inherently exist, which means there is an independent self-existence that is real of something. So these other schools then hear this, that what the Buddha, when a Buddha becomes a Buddha, they have no thoughts, no concepts. Well, then how can they actually help anybody? This doesn't make any sense. If a Buddha has no conceptual mind, how could you meaningfully make offerings to a Buddha? How could they meaningfully even understand what you're doing and accept them? How could you even take refuge in a Buddha? Things like that. So that these are legitimate questions that all of us have, because we haven't reached that stage of omniscience yet. We haven't even had a pure thought. So it's we haven't had a thought that isn't somehow, there's some grasping there in that thought, So this is a very good question. It's very important that Shantideva brings this up, because it's going to help us understand how Mahayana and Hinayana relate to one another, how they relate to them. A lot of times, Mahayana is seen as being better somehow, and Hinayana is seen as being somehow deficient or lower. And this is a mistaken view. We'll see the relationship between Hinayana and Mahayana as we go through this. So, Shantideva gives a response to these questions. How can a Buddha even help if they don't have a conceptual mind? And here's stanza 35. As the wishing jewel and tree of miracles fulfill and satisfy all hopes and wishes, likewise, through their prayers for those who might be trained, the physical appearance of the conquerors occurs. Of course, the conquerors is referring to the Buddhas. The Prasangikas respond to the realist school's objections by saying that just as wish-fulfilling trees and gems have no conceptual mind and can fulfill and satisfy the hopes and wishes of those who pray to them, and this was, we don't have a lot of that now, but definitely in India now, that still exists. In Tibet, that kind of thing still exists among people around the world who have deep faith. many religions still have things like this, where there are shrines or places that they go to. They pray at these shrines and they experience some kind of effect, some kind of positive effect, whether it's a physical healing, an emotional healing, anything like that. People have these kinds of experiences. Not so much in this country, because we've kind of had it pushed out of us by a very, very strong conceptual way of looking at everything, and almost a very strong non-faith-based way of looking at everything. This is sort of the direction a lot of Western countries have taken. So seems unusual for us to hear this and we go, that's a bunch of bunk. I mean, pray to a jewel and you're going to get, your wishes granted. That is, to us it is, but to others it's not. And to many other people in religions, and particularly when you're talking 8th century India, that's definitely the case. Definitely the case.
So what does Mahayana say about that?
But what they're saying is, just as some people can make prayers to a wish-fulfilling tree or a jewel or something like that and receive benefit from it, so can they make prayers to a non-conceptual Buddha, because those wish-fulfilling gems and trees and all that, they don't have no conceptual mind. So can people make prayers to an image or a statue or a thought even of the Buddha, and that will have an effect on them because of their faith, right? So what he says is that even though Buddhists have no conceptions, through the force of having made prayers when they were bodhisattvas, remember when I said when they were going through this part, it's in the path of meditation, the fourth path, and they're making these prayers, which are prayerful aspirations. And I was saying these prayerful aspirations are like vows. They're making vows. They're at this very, very high level, right before they achieve Buddhahood. And in their mind, they're making these vows that they are attaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings who are looking for help. So even though there is not the conceptual mind, the Bodhisattva has passed away. But that mental continuum has not. The mental continuum with all of its imprints are there. This purified mental continuum with these imprints of wanting to be of benefit to all sentient beings as an enlightened being are in the mental continuum of the consciousness, the awareness, we should say. It's because it's not talking about conceptual mental continuum. What they're talking about is the continuum of consciousness. That consciousness is what the Buddha's awareness is. So when the Buddha is aware that there's a need, because the Buddha is omniscient. Remember, the omniscience is what actually is actually the trigger for enlightenment. So when the omniscient mind is aware that there's a need, then spontaneously, without having to think about it, the Buddha manifests in whatever form is beneficial. Whatever form is beneficial. And think about that. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a Buddha. It doesn't have to even have anything to do with Buddhism. Just any form that is going to be beneficial for that sentient being who's crying out for help, that's going to be the thing that they need to experience, that is going to help move them to the next level towards, liberation from suffering. That's what a Buddha does. And they do it spontaneously. And they say it can be done, a Buddha can manifest multiple different kinds of bodies and manifestations and all at once. So this is not something we can understand, and all we can do is basically rely on what our teachers have told us and what the Buddha himself, the historical Buddha, has said. But this is something we have to noodle out for ourselves, analytically, looking at our own practice, looking at the accomplishments we've made along the way with our practice, and realizing, we couldn't have made these accomplishments without our spiritual teachers, without help, without depending on somebody who's helping us all along the way. So this is enough for me anyway, to know that if it's possible to go all the way to enlightenment, and that's what this is all about, then of course that's the whole point. A Buddha is going to be able to help, and the Buddha does not need to have a conceptual mind in order to do that. They say that the Buddha can manifest with a conceptual mind. most Tibetans believe His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a manifestation of the Buddha of compassion, generosity. And of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama clearly has a conceptual mind, you know. You have something to say?
Yeah. I think we've all had sort of a taste of what it's like to interact with beings not engaging our conceptual mind. It's rare because, you know, we have so many neurotic behavior patterns, but I had this experience last night and it's sort of funny. We went to a friend's birthday party and I basically wasn't engaging. I wasn't thinking at all, honestly. I was just seeing people and reacting. I mean, it felt very, I almost felt like I was drunk. It was weird, but I was just going from, I wasn't, you know, a lot of times we go to functions and we are very self-conscious. You know, how do I look? Do these shoes make me look fat? You know, who are these people? All the stupid things. But somehow I had this grace last night where I said to Christopher, I just felt like I was drunk or something. And it happened immediately when we entered into the house. I just went into this kind of weird, and I was approaching people and shaking their hand and introducing, and like, but I was just doing it. And I can honestly say it was not calculated. It was just a spontaneous spontaneous thing.
Yeah. So
So
that's
I think we've all had a taste of it.
of a spontaneous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you see you see a bunch of your family members or friends you haven't seen in a while, and you know, you're not thinking, you're not conceptualizing, you're just reacting and hugging and loving and laughing and all that stuff.
If you have a good relationship with your family.
Or friends.
But you know, friends, right? But that's a really good point about, because we ourselves, that's what Kavita's pointing out, is that we ourselves, during times of our life, we've had that experience of just spontaneous sort of an embracing or of others, really.
I think in times of crisis,
Yeah.
you can also have.
So in times of crisis. So if we can just think of that from our own experience and then just kind of imagine, oh, the Buddha in a much more expansive and vast way is doing the same thing. But because the Buddha has trained before becoming enlightened, that's what they're doing. That's what they're going to be doing. That's their whole purpose. So it's in their mind stream. It's in their stream of consciousness to be doing that. So the realist schools object to this idea that the Buddha a long time ago, the Bodhisattva right before the Bodhisattva became a Buddha, you know, they made these huge prayerful aspirations and vows to be of benefit. And so the realist schools say, well, okay, but those prayers were made a really long time ago. And so why should that have an effect now? They probably, you know, the effect of them could easily have just died out because the Bodhisattva passed away a long time ago. So now we go into a whole new kind of thing here. And this is stanza 36. And this will need some explanation. It says, the healing shrine of the Garuda, even when its builder was long dead, continued even ages thence to remedy and soothe all plagues and venoms. And I couldn't find what the healing shrine of Garuda was in any of the commentaries. So I found it in, of all places, Wikipedia. The healing shrine referred to this stanza is called the Hilodorus pillar. It's a stone column that was erected around 113 BCE in north central India. It was given the name Garuda by Heliodorus, the ambassador, who delivered the stone pillar as a gift from the ruler of an Indo-Greek city in Punjab, which is in Western India, to the king of the Brahmin ruler of north central India. From Punjab,
Indo-Greek.
yeah, it was Indo-Greek. It was it was Indo-Greek at the time. So I mean, the guy had the name Heliodoros, which is a Greek name, right?
Okay.
We're talking 113 BCE. Yeah. Yeah. So the Garuda is a mythical bird-like creature that appears in both Hindu and Buddhist epics as the vehicle of the god Vishnu. In other words, the god Vishnu would fly on this sort of half human, half bird being. It's sort of like, I mean, we've seen it in movies, like in Lord of the Rings even. There are these flying creatures that people, ride on. Some are good, some are nasty, but these were good ones. So the pillar itself bears religious inscriptions and relics. It's still there. I mean, you can see it. You can go to Wikipedia and see photos of this pillar, the Shrine of Garuda. The pillar itself bears religious inscriptions and relics, and is an example of what is called a stamba, S-T-A-M-B-A-H, stamba, in Indian architecture. Shantideva is saying in this stanza that the shrine of the Garuda around the 1st century BCE had long, that the person, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Shantideva is saying in the stanza that although the builder, the person who built the stamba pillar, who put special consecrated substances and relics and things in that shrine of Garuda around the 1st century BCE, has long since passed away. The shrine was continuing to alleviate plagues and poisons for people during Shantideva's time, and which was 9 centuries later. So what he's pointing out to these, this is 8th century, right? So he's pointing out to the people who are saying, no, there's no way the Buddha could have made these prayers and they'd still be effective. He's saying, well, look at this, the shrine of the Garuda. People are still going to this shrine 9 centuries later, and they're still, being relieved of their plagues and their suffering and all of this. It has to do with the strength of the prayer, the power of the prayer that the person is making, the shrine, right? And it also has to do with the faith of the person going to that shrine, that they're actually connecting with that powerful presence.
And isn't that also dependent origination?
That's a
Because
dependent
it's-
horizon. Yeah.
So much has gone into that it continues.
Right,
and
it
so
can-
it continues to be powerful and.
Right. I mean, if you think of Lourdes, if people have heard of Lourdes, that's a good example for I guess it's Catholic, really, Lourdes. It's a place in France, the water, and you can go bathe in the water or drink the water, and many people are healed by that. Still today. So it has to do with the power of the place itself and the faith that the people have in it. And this is what Shantideva is saying. So, stanza 37, he says, likewise, having gained the shrine of victory in accordance with their deeds for sake of Buddhahood, though bodhisattvas pass beyond all grief, they yet can satisfy all ends. So he's saying in dependence upon their sonam and the merit and their wisdom, bodhisattvas create kind of like a virtual shrine. When they become a Buddha, it's sort of like this virtual reliquary or shrine that is able to be of benefit to all beings, because the Buddha is spontaneously just responding to all the suffering of beings that are turning toward the Buddha, or who are just asking for help, maybe not even thinking that it's the Buddha. This is another very interesting aspect. And you have to sort of open your mind up to think about this. But like I was saying, the Buddha could appear in any form to anybody who needed help. So you could be very, and I'm not discounting anything to do with any other religion. I'm just putting it out there for consideration. And in my own case, this kind of thing occurred to me. So I was raised Catholic, didn't like the religion at all. I hated going to church. I didn't like the nuns and didn't like the priests, but I had a very, very strong connection with Jesus. And it got particularly strong as I became, it went into like being 12, 13, 14, very, very, very strong. And so that presence, that being was very powerful to me and was with me like I felt it was my friend, my spiritual friend was with me. And Kabir and I studied many religions throughout throughout the ensuing years. And when we studied Buddhism, and I took refuge with Geshe Drakpa, I felt like this friend, this Jesus. I was sitting in our living room and on the floor, and Geshe Drakpa we were taking refuge with him. And I felt like this presence was there behind me, put their hands on my shoulders and said, I'm turning you over to this now. So there's one way to say these enlightened beings are all connected. This Christ consciousness is connected to Buddha consciousness. There's no reason why they would be fighting with one another. They would all be supporting and helping one another. So I just want to put that out for consideration, that somewhat like a Jesus figure could appear to you, but it could actually be taking you to another level
Or
that you need to
it
go
could be
to.
the Buddha.
Or it could be the Buddha taking that form. Taking a form. The Buddha could take a form that you can relate to in the culture that you've grown up in, that it won't seem weird or scary or frightening to you. And I think this is what occurred to me. And I'm just putting that out there as an example of how the Buddhists can spontaneously take a form that's going to be of benefit, and then lead you along the way. The point is that although the Bodhisattva who made the prayers to become a Buddha and accumulated the merit and wisdom to do so has ceased to exist, the continuum of that consciousness continues to exist as the consciousness of a Buddha. In this way, the effects of the Bodhisattva's deeds are able to manifest effortlessly at the time of Buddhahood. So the realist schools then come back again, and this is stanza 38. And they say, but how can offerings be made to beings freed from all discursiveness give fruit? They're saying if the Buddhists don't have a conceptual mind, what's the point of making offerings to them? How can there be any fruit from that? Since they couldn't have any conscious acceptance of these gifts, how could any merit result from the act of making offerings? How can you get any merit from making offerings to a being who doesn't have any conscious acceptance of them? And the Prasangika has a very interesting response to this. This is stanza 39. It says, whether you assert them in the ultimate or relative, ultimate or conventionally speaking, merit, so the scriptures say, arises, just as there will be results when Buddhas are considered truly real. So what he's saying there is that although Buddhas have no conceptual minds, it's taught in the scriptures that whether we make offerings to an incarnate Buddha or to a reliquary shrine, the merit is the same. So the Prasangikas say whether our offering is made to what we think of as an inherently existing offering, a truly existing offering, and we're making it to a truly existing Buddha, and we're going to receive truly existing merit from that. Prasangikas are saying it's the same as if you were saying, I'm making dependently arising offerings to a dependently arising Buddha, and I'm receiving dependently arising merit. Dependently arising means that it doesn't exist inherently. So the realist schools they have trouble with the concept of emptiness. And so they're thinking that it has to be inherently existing for it to work. For you to actually get inherently existing merit, there has to be an inherently existing Buddha there for you to make offerings to, with an inherently existing offering. But the fact is, a Buddha is a dependent arising, as are we, as are every offering that we could ever make. They are all dependent arisings. I mean, all we have to do is just study it, just ourselves, study it just on a material level, and we'll see that. They don't exist. Nothing exists independently at all. So that's the Prasangika's response, and it makes sense, when you think about it. So there we go. So what the realists do is they look upon the cause and effect relationship of all phenomena, as being a truly existing thing. That they're saying that there could be no cause and effect if things didn't exist independently. How could that work? You know, they have to have some kind of existence for there to be some kind of effect. It makes no sense that you're saying that that's not the case. But the Prasangikas come back and they say, no, that's impossible. If anything was truly independent, like you're saying, truly independent, that means that it's not depending on anything for its existence. That means, and we love to think of ourselves as being independent, especially in the United States. Independent, we're independent. We're not independent, not at all, not at all. We depend on everything. You know, the air our bodies depend on the air we breathe. I mean, the food we eat, we depend on the whole systems of government and everything that are existing. We depend on the entire system of trade and things in the world. We're just talking on a material level. It's illogical for us to think that we're actually independent. We're not. And so if something was truly independent, it would be impossible for any kind of cause and effect relationship to occur. Impossible. Because if everything was independent, then it exists without the benefit of anything else, without depending on anything else. And everything would just be permanent phenomena that existed eternally. And that's not what's going on. That's not what is actually happening. So Prasangika is sort of pointing this out to the realist schools, saying, you know, you're sort of mistaken in thinking that there is anything that is actually independent. If you actually look at what independent is saying, what it actually means. And we ourselves have to think about this, because we've been habituated to thinking the idea of independence is a good one. We like it. We like that idea, but we're truly actually not at all. And the sooner we recognize that, and the sooner we recognize our actual interdependence and our interconnectedness, the happier we're actually going to be. And the more benefit we can be to others, and the more space we'll give to others, more acceptance, more patience, more generosity, all of those things. So Prasangika says cause and effect relationships are only able to occur because events and things exist as dependent arisings. So now we get into this a kind of a debate between Mahayana and Hinayana. Shantideva sets up a debate between the two traditions. So Hinayana means small vehicle in Sanskrit. And it's a name that was given to the orthodox conservative schools of Buddhism by the Mahayana tradition in the 1st or 2nd century CE. So this is long. I mean, these other schools have been around for a long time. They were actually the Mahayana, the Hinayana, in terms of what we've been talking about, like the schools of tenets. The Hinayana would be the Vaibhashika school and the Sautrantika school. But within the Vaibhashika school, it's divided into 18 different Hinayana schools. So they always talk about there were at least 18 to 30 Hinayana schools that existed at that time. And Mahayana gave this name Hinayana, which means small vehicle, as opposed to what they were saying, Mahayana, which means great vehicle. And what they were saying is that their tradition was taking in, according to them, the complete teachings of the Buddha. All of the teachings that are not in the Hinayana. The Mahayana is not saying the Hinayana is to be discarded at all, or it's somehow lesser, because in Mahayana, we are training in Hinayana practices. It's all part of Mahayana. But Mahayana is basically saying there is more. There is more that the Buddha taught. There is more there that needs to be studied and realized. Otherwise, you're not receiving you're not getting the full effect of what the Buddha was teaching. So the Hinayanas rejected this. And they never assumed or took on the label that the Mahayana created for them. and they maintained their own, separate schools. And currently today, what we have is Theravada, is the current example, a prime example of what would have been Hinayana Theravada. And it's very, like I said, we shouldn't be, they shouldn't be discounted at all. I mean, what Theravada is teaching, what the Hinayana is teaching, is absolutely important. The main difference, the big main difference, has to do with emptiness. This doctrine of emptiness. Like I was saying before, the other schools, the realist schools, were thinking that, well, things exist independently, and this is where the problem is occurring. So Mahayana is saying there's more that we have to talk about. So the Mahayanas applied that term Hinayana collectively to what are called the Shravaka and the Pratyeka Buddha paths of Buddhism. So I'm not sure we've gotten into this before, but Shravakas are what are called hearers. They listen to the Dharma, and through listening to the Dharma, they eventually have a realization of the Four Noble Truths, and they achieve what is called arhatship. They are liberated from the suffering of samsara, suffering of cyclic existence. This is called the Shravakas, the hearers. Then there are the Pratyeka Buddhas. These are called solitary realizers, and Pratyeka Buddha literally means lone Buddha, lone Buddha. So the Pratyeka Buddhas attain Buddhahood all on their own, without relying on, other teachers and things like that. And they have a kind of a sort of a lone, what they term as like a solitary Buddhahood. They are not. Well, I'll read it. I mean, I'll read what they are. They are not omniscient. They are unable to completely teach the Dharma for the benefit of others. Pratyeka Buddhas do not bring others to enlightenment, and they leave no Sangha as a legacy to carry on the Dharma. They are sometimes referred to as intermediate Buddhas, and as such have not attained the omniscient state of full enlightenment, but rather from a Mahayana viewpoint, they've attained a level of arhatship that is sort of broader than what the Shravaka has attained. So our teachers would often talk about them as like, if you again take this analogy of we're on one shore, and we're looking. There's the sea of samsara, right? And on the other side of the sea of samsara is the shore of enlightenment. And so all these practices we're doing, and our teachers, they're taking us across the sea of samsara to reach enlightenment. So our teachers would say that an arhat is like a Buddha, a lone Buddha who's just sort of asleep on the beach there on the other side of samsara. They're just sort of asleep on the beach, while the omniscient Buddhas, the Mahayana Buddhas, they're out there in the water. They're throwing life rafts out to the people who are making their way across samsara. They're pulling them out. They're making all these, they're holding hands, and they're making a chain of Buddhas that go way out into samsara and grab people and pull them back. They're working to benefit these other beings, whereas the arhat is just asleep on the beach. And they said eventually what happens, and he goes into much more detail about this, which we'll get into. But eventually what happens is the Mahayana Buddhas have to kind of gently tap the Arhat Buddha on the shoulder and say, okay, it's time. There's more to do. You actually have to go through this whole Bodhisattva path. You have to have a realization of emptiness and do this, and have the desire to be of benefit to others, to actually, have a full kind of enlightenment. But the Pratyeka Buddhas, by their own definition in the Hinayana, they're lone Buddhas, solitary Buddhas. So that's not what a Mahayana would say is the purpose. Or
Do they think of themselves as lone, independent, and not dependent arising? Because if they're if they view it as all connected, just their state of presence would be of benefit to others. And that's a fine line. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Like,
and
thought.
what what they say is that we'll get into this in more detail, but there are two types of what they call selflessness, or two types of emptiness, you might say. And they call it the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. So there's this means that the person, which is just an imputed conceptual idea based on the aggregates that make up our existence. The person actually doesn't, the I, doesn't actually exist. It's a imputed concept. So to realize that is called to realize the selflessness of the person. And this is all that the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas say needs to be done. All they need to do is realize that there is no self. They say that everything else is not empty, is not selfless. Phenomena exists. It truly exists.
But they are.
But they
because
self.
they've achieved.
Right. Because they have had a realization of no self, they're out of samsara. But there's an issue that arises that because they haven't got the full breadth of what we're talking about, what the Buddha was talking about with emptiness. They haven't realized that phenomena is empty as well. And so that's why it's sort of like the lone Buddha on the beach, just not doing anything. So so the Hinayanists then say in stanza 40, well, we're free through seeing the Four Noble Truths. What use is it to us, this view of emptiness that you're talking about? And the Mahayanists come back and they say, but as the scriptures have themselves proclaimed, without this path, there cannot be any enlightenment. The Buddha himself said, without a realization of emptiness, there can be no enlightenment. So the Hinayanists are saying, since they achieved liberation from the suffering of cyclic existence by gaining a direct realization of the Four Noble Truths, what's the point of striving to realize emptiness of inherent existence as it's set forth in Shantideva's previous verses? Shantideva refutes the Hinayanists by pointing out that in many of the discourses given by the Buddha, it's clearly stated that if one grasps onto reality, lacking the view of emptiness, there is no liberation from the suffering of cyclic existence. Those sutras state that beings who wish to follow the spiritual paths of Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, all of them should train in wisdom realizing emptiness. Therefore, all three levels of awakening are impossible without a realization of emptiness. And they're talking about both the emptiness of the person and the emptiness of phenomena. This is what the Mahayana is talking about. So the Mahayanists are talking to the Hinayanists, and they say, this is stanza 41. You say that the Mahayana has no certainty, but how do you substantiate your own tradition? And the Hinayanists say, because it is accepted by both of us. We both accept this tradition. That's why we can say it's true. So the Mahayanists say then, but at the outset, you yourself lacked proof. So this is saying that the Hinayanists don't accept the Mahayana scriptures as being the pure word of the Buddha. They say that it's not, they don't believe it. But they consider them to be writings composed after the Buddha had passed into nirvana by those who were merely intellectuals, followers of the Buddha who were intellectuals. They wrote down these Mahayana sutras and scriptures that the Buddha had nothing to do with it. So they say that the Mahayanists can't prove their point by citing any kind of sutra whose authority is in question. And they're saying the Mahayana sutra's authority is in question. Since the Hinayanists don't accept the Mahayana as the genuine teaching of the Buddha, the question of how they prove the authenticity of their own scriptures is now asked by the Mahayanists. It's now asked by Shantideva. The Hinayanists say that the authenticity of their scriptures is demonstrated by the fact that they're accepted by both the Hinayanists and the Mahayanists. To them, that proves it. Therefore, they say their scriptures are firmly established beyond question. But the Mahayanists respond by saying that those scriptures were not established as the word of the Buddha for the Hinayana followers at the time they were born, when they didn't even believe in the Hinayana tradition yet and hadn't accepted its validity for themselves. It was only accepted by them on the basis of certain reasons as they were growing up within their community and they were learning about Hinayana. They weren't born with this, knowledge that these are the true scriptures. So in stanza 42, Shantideva says, the reasons why you trust in your tradition may likewise be applied to the Mahayana. Moreover, if accord between two parties is what shows the truth, then the Vedas and the rest are also true. So here's what he's saying. The reasons for trusting in the Hinayana scriptures as being the word of the Buddha can equally be applied to why you would trust the Mahayana scriptures. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says there are three criteria or reasons for establishing that certain teachings are the Buddha's words. All right, so they are, one, the guidance contained in them is permitted in the Vinaya, and the Vinaya are the rules of conduct and ethics and things like that for ordained monks and nuns. So the guidance contained in them is permitted in those rules of ethics and conduct for nuns and monks. Two, they relate to the Buddhist canonical scriptures known as the sutras, many of which are regarded as records of the oral teachings of Gautama Buddha. And three, they relate to and are not incompatible with the system of Buddhist philosophy, psychology, and ethics that's known as the Abhidharma, that emerged after the time of the Buddha around the 3rd century BCE. And His Holiness is saying all of those criteria are satisfied by the Mahayana canon. Furthermore, if one assumes that the authenticity and truth of the Hinayana canon is simply on the ground that two parties, in this case the Hinayana and the Mahayanas, both agree that the Hinayana are the words of the Buddha, so then any two parties of a tradition, if they agree upon something, that makes it true. So like we were saying, if the large body of Hindu religious texts originating in ancient India called the Vedas, as well as any other religious text in the world, they would have to be considered as authentic as well, simply because, for this reason, that two parties agree that it's so. And I mean, every religion is this way. People of the religion all agree that their religion is so. They believe it firmly. Even when you get into sects of different religions, they have their own particular sect, and the parties within that sect say, ours is the right sect. Ours is the correct one. This other one, they're really screwed up. They're all mistaken. They went the wrong way. But each one thinks their way is the authentic way. And so what all the Mahayanists are saying is that's not a good reason for saying it's valid or authentic. And that's not a good reason that the Hinayanists are giving to say, just because Hinayana and Mahayana agree that Hinayana are words of the Buddha is not a good reason. So then they go on. The Hinayanists say, okay, in stanza 43, well, Mahayana is at fault because it's contested. And the Mahayana say, but Buddhist texts are questioned by extremists, while Buddhists also among themselves disagree. And so your own tradition, you must now abandon. So the Hinayana is saying there's a lot of dispute surrounding Mahayana. And so therefore, just because it's controversial, it has to be discarded. But Mahayanas are saying, well, it's all the different, these 18 schools that I was talking about, the Hinayana schools, they all have controversies among themselves. That's why they have their own little sects. That's why they say, well, you're not right about this and you're not right about that. So there is controversy, there is criticism. So he's saying that, again, is not a good reason for saying Mahayana, just because it's in dispute doesn't mean it's not so. That's not a good reason. So and then he says, and of course, anybody who's a non-Buddhist doesn't believe in the Hinayana. So there it's contested right there, So you just have to, those are poor reasons for saying something is authentic. And we have to actually apply this to everything, even in our world today. You cannot say any system is authentic just because a group of people agree that it is so. Just because a group of people agree, we are all in agreement on this, is not what makes something authentic. You know, and that's important to remember in our world, because there's a lot of that going on.
It's interesting that in the context of this debate,
Mhm.
they're actually talking about written scriptures. That's all I was gonna say.
Oh,
I
well,
mean,
it's more than just written scriptures. They're talking about their own experience. They're you know, when they're talking amongst themselves.
right, but they're using the validity of a scripture as their,
Yeah.
as the basis
Yeah.
of their argument.
Right. And they're saying Mahayana scripture can't be valid because, you know, this is not part of our
That's
scripture.
my point, is
Yeah.
they're talking about
Yeah.
books.
And we have that going on today as well.
Mhm.
We have the same thing going on today. Wars are fought over it. So this is a very important topic that Shantideva is raising here. Not just for back then, but for now. All right, now they're going into arguments for the authenticity of the Mahayana. So there are arguments for the authenticity of Mahayana scriptures that are found in the writings of Shantideva, Nagarjuna, and Maitreya. Now here we go. I'm going to read this. This is from His Holiness. It's extremely interesting. This is His Holiness's commentary. He says that the fact that the authenticity of the Mahayana scriptures has been questioned is quite understandable. In the Mahayana Sutras, many extraordinary mysteries are discussed, which the minds of ordinary beings like ourselves cannot comprehend. When we fail to understand something, we have a tendency to doubt its validity. When we fail to understand something, we have a tendency to say, that's not true, that's not valid. This is an important lesson for us as Bodhisattva practitioners, that we have to be very, very clear in our logic and our reasoning, and not just because we don't understand something, it's not a good reason to say that it can't be true. You know, we have to use our reason and logic. So His Holiness says that if only the Hinayana and not the Mahayana Sutras were the Buddha's teachings, then the Buddhist spirituality would be limited and deprived of its richness and strength. If the Mahayana canon were not the Buddha's teachings, then one could ask whether it would be possible to obtain omniscience of Buddhahood by means of the Hinayana path alone. Even the Hinayana scriptures acknowledge the different spiritual paths of hearers, Shravakas, solitary realizers, pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. They talk about Bodhisattvas in the Hinayana path. But without the Mahayana, how could one even proceed on the Bodhisattva path? How is the awakening of a Buddha experienced? It would be extremely difficult to set out on that path solely on the basis of the Hinayana scriptures. So His Holiness says, one cannot realize emptiness or attain the nirvana of Buddhahood on the basis of the Hinayana scriptures and treatises alone. Without a realization of emptiness, nirvana cannot be attained. The truth of the cessation of suffering would be nothing more than words. Therefore, if the authenticity of the Mahayana is not established, it's virtually impossible for the Hinayana's authenticity to be established. So here he's going into now some of how the Mahayana teachings and scriptures came about. So His Holiness is saying that the widely celebrated teachings that the historical Buddha gave in India, those are the Hinayana discourses. You know, the ones that the Theravadins agree with, the Hinayanas agree with, all those discourses that everybody knows the Buddha gave. Those are the Hinayana. Those are the Hinayana discourses. But apart from those, His Holiness believes that the Buddha gave Mahayana teachings to a small number of beings who were pure in their action or pure in their karma. For example, the teachings on emptiness that are found in the Heart Sutra that took place on Vulture's Peak in India are recorded as having been given in the midst of thousands and thousands of people and beings and things like that. He said, but if you go to Vulture's Peak, it's really, really small. I mean, there's no way that thousands and thousands and thousands of people could fit on this little hill that's Vulture's Peak. So there's not enough room. Even if there were beings that were, like godlike beings with sort of subtle bodies, there's not enough room for all these beings. So they probably were not assembled on that hill as we perceive it, is what His Holiness is saying. When the Buddha gave Mahayana teachings there, they were heard by disciples who were pure in action, had pure karma. And to them, that site appeared broad and vast. The Buddha did not offer Mahayana teachings to the public. They wouldn't have been of benefit to them. The public wasn't ready, to hear that. His most public or celebrated discourses were given in the presence of such Shravakas as Shariputra and Maudgalyayana. Shariputra and Maudgalyayana were direct disciples of the Buddha, but they were Shravakas. They were Hinayanists. The Buddha didn't teach those ones the Mahayana practices because they weren't ready for them. They were not at a level where they could hear that or it could be understood by them. Any parent knows this with how they raise a child. So you're at a certain ages, children are not ready to hear certain things. It's only as we become older and older and we get all the way into adulthood and past adulthood before we're ready to hear some things. And even then, it's difficult. Some things are difficult for us to take in. And really, I think our country has done a pretty good job of taking in more and more and more different kinds of concepts and assimilating different ways that people can be. Even though we have lots of problems, I still think, given the age of our country, which is, it's not even 250 years yet, we've accomplished huge amounts simply by throwing a bunch of people from different cultures, different genetics, different everything together and having to work through it. We've become more tolerant than we would have otherwise been. And that's a good thing. You can't say that's a bad thing. Yes, we still have problems, but we're working through them. It's a good thing.
Christopher, I have a question, and that is, so when you're looking at these different schools, could you say that from the Mahayana viewpoint, the Theravada schools, is it like a statement of evolution in a way that it's like as we evolve in our understanding and experience of the path of enlightenment, we are able to, and so some of that has more limited, where it's not going to go anywhere, or it's viewed as separately versus true emptiness, that's just a part of the evolutionary path of awakening, that it's all inherent, like we all have that within us to really fully awaken, and it's just kind of where you.
I would agree with that. Basically, I think what it requires is we have to open up our mind first. Open up our mind, open up our heart. Because when we are saying something must be this way and we put it in a box, we sort of keep out all the other possibilities, which Mahayana is not doing. Mahayana is opening up to all possibilities, where other views they sort of think they've got it down, they've got it in the box, they've got it figured out, and anything that sort of contrasts with them is almost seen as frightening, because it threatens the safe box that they've kind of put around themselves. And that's, all of us have to be in that place at some time in our evolution. We have to feel like we're in a safe box at some time. There's no way you can develop an open mind and an open heart without having had the safety to do so, the feeling of safety to do so. So yeah, I guess maybe it's evolutionary.
I look at it as, I'm just curious what the thought is, and then even if you haven't taken vows of Bodhisattva, or if you're not on this path, like if someone who just doesn't have access to this wisdom, they still inherently, they still have within their propensity
Mhm.
the ability to awaken.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know.
Like I said, I
just thinking.
I don't actually think it would have to come via Mahayana Buddhism.
That
Right.
you awaken.
It's right. I mean, if it's going to work for you to have some other, say, like if you were going to be Christ consciousness to it, and it's teaching you the same things. You know, it's basically teaching you everything's dependently arising. You're opening up to all, and you want to be of benefit to all sentient beings. Well, so be it. It's just how you're labeling it. And at the end, at the final, when you've achieved that consciousness,
It all
the labels
comes
are gone.
in.
Yeah. So, I just personally
ultimate-
find this as being the most clear
Yeah.
path I've found. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, ultimately, everything is just a label. You know, I think the human beings are the ones who don't embrace the diversity and create wars when there's difference, if they're not secure in knowing that it is an evolutionary process of spirituality, of awakening. We all have the ability to do it, like Merritt was saying.
Yeah.
You know, and many people, from my experience, there are a lot of people who are fearful of things outside of their box, you know, and because of that ignorance and fear, then they start creating, depending on their level of hierarchy and whatever environment they're in, they start wars over their
Right.
fear.
Right.
You know, oh my gosh, they're different, we got to kill them all.
Right,
You know, it's
right,
no,
right.
let's celebrate each other's differences.
Mhm.
You know, let's learn from each other from a different perspective is my thought. But you know,
I agree with you. I mean, I agree. We're the ones who are doing all the labeling.
right,
Yeah.
because we have a very limited capacity. We have this
Yeah.
physical being and these senses and the sense organs, and that's it. We don't, I mean, there's some of us who have higher evolved senses, you know, that go beyond, but there are even people who cannot understand that concept.
Mhm.
That there are people who have telepathic, you know, or the
Yeah.
clairs, as they say, you know, clair gifts. They just can't see beyond that, and that can't be real because they can't see beyond it. Well, it is real. It can be existing, whether you agree with it or not. You
Yeah,
know?
like Shanti Deva is saying, that just because
Yeah.
we don't understand it is not a valid reason to discount something, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
You know, and when you go to labels, I mean, this idea of labels has been around a long time. I mean, Shakespeare, in his wisdom, said, "A rose by any other name would still be as sweet." Would still
Right.
smell as sweet. So a Buddha by any other name, an enlightened being by any other name, is still going to be an enlightened being.
Exactly.
Just these labels,
Exactly.
you know, we can get stuck. We can get stuck on the labels. I think that's
We
what we
get stuck in the labels and our fear and the boxes in which we put
Yeah.
things in.
Yeah.
It's tear down the walls, get rid of the boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the other one element is that we become our reputation and our self, you know, our image that we like to project is one of the elements, because we in general don't like to have to admit we were mistaken. And so,
Right.
you know, that is an element.
Yeah, or we don't want to rock the boat or have somebody make fun of us,
Well,
or
there's
you know.
that too.
Again, usually based in
You know, you
fear.
wanna go with the herd, more or less.
Right.
Right.
And that's, you know, especially dangerous right now because we all know the reasons why.
Right. Right.
Because the herd is so, it's so easy to put forth any and every kind of messaging to a massive herd of humanoids
Right.
very quickly these days.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we are in super interesting times. Like the Jews say, "May you live in interesting times," and we're
We
doing
do.
it. We are living in interesting times.
What Libra put something up, you couldn't see what it said, sheeple?
Sheeple?
Sheeple,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Sheeple, yeah, that's a term that just like
Well, that would
probably
be
came within the last
what
20 years.
Michael would be really into. If I understand Michael's view of things correctly, he would be a people pointer outer. Yeah.
Okay, so now we go on. His Holiness talking about the Mahayana and how it's how these scriptures came about. So according to His Holiness, the smallest number of disciples that the Buddha had were of extraordinarily pure karma action. The Buddha gave tantric teachings. To some of those disciples, he generated a mandala with himself as the deity within it, the center of this mandala, engaging in meditative concentration on non-duality. But the chief deity in the mandala appeared in the form of the Buddha as a monk. So when we are, in our visualizations or imagining the Buddha in the form, well, this is sort of as an enjoyment, but in the form of a monk, we're sort of echoing this. This is why I said these prayers and the visualizations that go with them are the foundations of a tantric practice. And if we're interested in going into a tantric practice, we should familiarize ourselves with these opening prayers and going deep into their meaning, which is why I gave the links to how we can do that.
And the Tibetan alphabet.
Yeah, yes, and then we can read it in the original
So
language.
then you can visualize.
So then the subtler mysteries were taught to disciples of even greater purity, who by practicing higher forms of method and wisdom gained realization of non-dual ultimate and phenomenal reality. For such disciples, there were no obstructions to the Buddha casting off the form of a monk and appearing as a richly adorned deity or as a world monarch. For them, it was very meaningful for the Buddha to appear in such forms. We do have other religions that talk about this. I think as when I grew up in the similar kinds of things. When I grew up in the Catholic religion, there's things in the Christian scripture that talk about. There was some point where Jesus had this transfiguration, and they saw them as the complete enlightened being that they actually were, and that sounds similar to this kind of thing. So that I believe in every major religion, you're going to find a sort of an esoteric path in there. You're going to find it in Islam. You're going to find it in Christianity. You find it in Buddhism. You're going to find it in Judaism. You're going to find an esoteric path in there. And basically, the purpose is to bring us to these states, So we shouldn't be against the other paths. We just go, all right, this is the one that's working for me right now, and so be it. I'm going on this.
Your time is up.
My time is up.
Yep.
This time's up. Ah! Oh boy! All right.
Last week.
We did. We got spoiled last week. Okay. All right. Let's quickly do a dedication.
Actually, we probably could go past that too.
Yeah, I think we did. All right. Let's do the two dedication prayers. They're on the same page as the 7-limit prayer, and we'll do them in English. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And now
Thank you,
we will
Christopher.
stop this recording, and we will go to Tibetan for all of us
Torture of
sophisticated beginners.
revelation of our lacking